What is going on, all you Pokemon collecting maniacs out there? This is Ryan, the PikaPikaPaPa, and I can't wait to talk Lost Origin with you all today. You know how big of a fan I am of the Lost Origin set. I think it is going to go down as one of the biggest and baddest sets of the entire Sword and Shield era, and that is saying a lot because the Sword and Shield era as a whole is absolutely epic, right? Right now, sealed product is going through the roof. Those alt arts, and rightfully so, are absolutely spiking in value. I don't know if they'll be able to hold on to it, but I have been saying this and I continue to say this. I think that sealed booster boxes, Lost Origin, Brilliant Stars in the Sword and Shield era are some of the absolute safest and probably some of the best investments that we could be making right now. With all of that being said though, I am the type of person that when the market is going right, I like to be that guy who's kind of peeking around the corner to the left, right? Is there anything out there where I can find value that maybe the market is overlooking, or maybe it's not getting its due love at this point in time? And that brought me to this idea, okay? So we've all aligned that Sword and Shield is going to be an epic era. A lot of us think Sword and Shield is going to be one of the best eras in recent memory. So I said, hey, if I'm going to look for some singles cards that could be undervalued at this point, that could give us some outsized gains in the next 3, 5, 10 years further down the road, let's start by looking at Sun and Moon. You know, Sun and Moon, you can say what you want. You can say it was a different era. You can say the print runs were different. You can say that the quality was different. You can say all of that, and that's all relevant. But at the end of the day, I wanted to see how some of these bigger sets in the Sun and Moon era, how their single cards have performed. So if you look at the two graphs down there at the bottom, on the left-hand side, I have all of the Sun and Moon era sets listed out, and then I have these three different dollar bands, okay? So on the far left is the number of cards from the set that it corresponds to that are over $100. To the right of that, that band right there is cards that are priced between $50 and $99.99, right? And the band to the right is all cards between $30 and $49.99. So using Cosmic Eclipse right there is the very top example. They have 6 cards in Cosmic Eclipse that are over $100. There's 8 cards in Cosmic Eclipse that are basically between $50 and $100. And then there are 6 cards in Cosmic Eclipse that are between $30 and $50. And I did that for all of the Sun and Moon sets, but I also did it for all of the Sword and Shield sets as well, because again, if we think Sword and Shield is going to be this amazing era that outperforms any in recent memory, don't we think that the number of singles cards in these dollar bands will somewhat correlate? I don't think it's going to be a one-for-one for all of the reasons I mentioned earlier, but I do think it should at least come close. So when I was looking at this and you see Cosmic Eclipse and Team Up, I'll tell you right now, I'm not doing a comparison to them because they just are off the charts, right? Those 20 cards in those 3 different bands for Cosmic Eclipse, 20 cards in those 3 different bands for Team Up. You could make an argument that Evolving Skies is going to be equal to Team Up, or at least somewhat of a comparison, so those two can kind of cancel out. But what I really wanted to dial in on when I'm looking at Lost Origin is Unified Minds and Unbroken Bonds. Now, if you look at both of the eras as a whole, right, there are 26 cards over $100 in the Sun and Moon era, right? There are only 18 cards over $100 in the Sword and Shield era. Not a huge gap, but still, I think that we have the base, the big chase cards have already been established in Sword and Shield. So we might have a couple that nip up over $100. Matter of fact, I think there's one on this list we're going to talk about in just a minute. But for the most part, the big chase cards are already set here in Sword and Shield. Now, where things really start to diverge is when you look at that middle column right there, when you look at the ones that are between $50 and $100. In Sun and Moon, there's 35 cards in that dollar band. In Sword and Shield, there's only 10. So I think that we have some opportunities for some cards in the Sword and Shield era to kind of bump up into there. And then again, when you look at the bottom band right there, crazy to say a bottom band is between $30 and $50. But in that lower band that we're looking at today, you see there's 44 cards from Sun and Moon in that $30 to $50 band. And then there's 22 cards in Sword and Shield in that $30 to $50 band. So I think we're going to have a ton of fun. Again, this is all speculation. Nobody knows for sure what's going to happen. But Lost Origin has some big names. Lost Origin has some epic art. So I could totally see some of these cards moving from the lower band into the upper band. And when you look at Lost Origin as a whole, there's only 1 card over $100. There's only 1 card in that $100 to $50 band, and there's only 2 cards in that $30 to $50 band. Man, if Sword and Shield does even a tenth of what we think it's going to do, and if Lost Origin ends up being one of the best sets, I 100% think that we're going to have more cards end up in those bands. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Now listen, before we get into the individual cards, if this kind of stuff pumps you up, if you like this data-driven approach, hit that subscribe button. If you like what you see, give us a thumbs up, and if you have questions or comments, drop them down below. Specifically, if you would like to see the same comparison for any other set in the Sword and Shield era, let me know the set you'd like to see, and I can pull the data and I can get that in front of you in a short amount of time. So with that being said, let's get into the actual cards that we're going to look at today. Now, here's what I wanted to start off with. I told you I was going to do a comparison between Unified Minds and Unbroken Bonds, right? So these are the top 15 cards in Unified Minds. Now, you have the Misty's Favor up there, which is obviously, like, that is one of the iconic cards of the Sun and Moon era. Then you've got that Sableye and Tyranitar, another just absolute epic artwork up there. You got the Mewtwo, you got the Mew. We got some pretty big name cards on here, right? But then you also have a lot of rainbows, and a lot of people in the beginning when rainbows came out, and even up to this day, aren't a huge fan of the rainbows, yet no matter what, look at all of these cards with all of these high values assigned to them. You got Raichu on there, you got Psyduck, you know what I mean? You've got 2 different supporters in there, you've got 1 stadium in there, you know, you got a pretty decent setup of cards here, but again, I mean, they're good, they're great, they're awesome, but are these like the really, really top tier of Pokemon cards? I'm not sure. And then when you look at the next one right here, Unbroken Bonds, I love this. Now, Unbroken Bonds is really hard to argue with, okay? So you got Charizard in there, you got Blastoise in there, I mean, you got 3 supporter cards in there, you got 1 item card, yeah, you got some rainbow cards in there, but that Gardevoir and Sylveon up there is a big chase card from the Sun and Moon era. You even got Machamp down there, you got Greninja in here. You got a lot of big name cards in here. So this one, even though we have some big names in there, I think that this is a pretty epic set. And again, you see some rainbows up there as well. So then, of course, what are we going to look at? Let's look at the top 15 in Lost Origin and just do a preliminary, how do these stack up? Now, the Giratina is going to be, in my mind, one of the big chase cards from the entire Sword and Shield era. That Giratina card is absolutely fire. It's a difficult grader compared to the other big chase cards in Sword and Shield. So I think that card is going to help propel this set. Then you've got the Aerodactyl, you got the Rotom, you got some Pikachus in there. You know, you got a lot of cool stuff, but some of my takeaways were this, okay? There is 5 Giratina cards in the top 15 right now. I have a strong feeling that when we look at this list again in a year, 2 years, 3 years, we are not going to have 5 different Giratina cards in the top 15 of Lost Origin, right? So that makes me think that, hey, there are going to be other cards that jump up into this top 15. The other thing that I wanted to call out too that is fundamentally different from the last 2 sets that we looked at is you have 1 stadium and 2 item cards on here. We don't have any support. You can go back for a long time. You can look at every single Sun and Moon set to the best of my knowledge, and you have at least 1 supporter card in the top 15. So when we talk about some of these cards that'll rotate out, some of these cards that might rotate in the future, is there going to be a supporter in the Lost Origin set that ends up in the top 15 like all of the other sets that we've seen? So with that being said, let's look at the 2 big alt arts right here. So you have the Aerodactyl, you have the Rotom V. The thing that I like about both of these, and specifically that Aerodactyl card right there, is listen, it is pretty well off of a 1-year high, okay? So it had a 1-year high of about 120 bucks, and now it's sitting right around the $100, $90 mark. So that is good for me. When I'm thinking about this, like when I think about the future of Lost Origin, do I think these cards will eventually break their 1-year high? I do. I don't know when it's going to happen. I think Lost Origin is going to have to sell out. I think we're going to have to wait a while after that. But I think this is pretty much cemented as the number 2 chase card in Lost Origin. And again, if Lost Origin is going to be one of the biggest and baddest sets, then I got a lot of faith in the number 2 chase card from it. And then the Rotom V right there, I have a little bit less faith in that. You'll see that this one is much closer to its 1-year high than it was before. But again, these cards they're right on par with the gem rate, okay? So they're at the very bottom of this page. I always like to talk about the PSA 10 population, God, that was hard, and also the overall gem rate. So you'll see that of the Aerodactyl, I mean, when you think about it, all things considered, there's only 2,200 of those in PSA 10 holders right now, and there's only been 4,300 sent to be graded. So you're at about a 50% gem rate, which is right in line with the Giratina. The Giratina chase card's at a 48%. And then you got the Rotom V right there. Really low PSA 10 population, only 738 of them in PSA 10 holders, and only 1,500 have been submitted. So again, really small population that has like a 47% gem rate. So these cards, I do think, have some opportunity for growth. The market has already supported them at one point at a higher price. I do think that once Lost Origin starts to become a little more scarce out there, that I think these singles cards will see some upside. And besides the big Giratina, these are the 2 next biggest ones. So I've got a lot of faith in them. Now, the next ones right here are a little bit of a surprise, right? I talked about cards that weren't on the list that might in the long run end up at the very top on this list. Now, do I think that these cards are going to be worth, you know, $20, $30, $40, $50 in the future? I absolutely do not, right? The pull rates were really easy on these cards, but I called them out because their current price points are really approachable. I mean, these are like $3 cards, and the artwork is absolutely fire. I love that Gengar on the far right. I think it is absolutely stunning. Now, the other thing I wanted to call out is, again, look at these gem rates. So the gem rates for a whole from this set is right around 50%, but for whatever reason, these three cards right here, their gem rate is insanely low. We're talking about in the 30% range, so these are much harder to get graded than the other cards that we're going to be talking about through the rest of this video. So you've got really awesome art, you've got some of the biggest names, Charizard, Pikachu, and Gengar, and you have some really hard graders. Again, they're $3 right now. I'm under no illusion. I don't think these are randomly going to pop up to be $30, $40, $50 cards someday, but I do think that these have the opportunity for some price appreciation, right? That Pikachu right there, there's been almost 3,900 of them sent through to get graded, only 1,100 in PSA 10s. The Gengar, you've had 3,100 of them sent through, only 1,200 in PSA 10s. The Charizard right there, you've had over 6,000 of them sent to PSA to get graded. There's only 2,200 in PSA 10s right now. I had somebody in the comments the other day who was asking me about, hey, listen, what PSA 10 cards are in the $40, $50 range right now that you think might have some long-term upside? Well, believe it or not, I know these aren't hard pulls, but I do think that these might have some upside in the PSA 10 space. Now, the other thing I want to caution about is there is a bunch of these sitting in binders and collections right now that people, just because the upside isn't there, they have not decided to send them through and get them graded. Now, what will happen is if the raw card do start to spike over time, if the PSA 10 price does start to spike over time, all those people who decided not to send them in because the grading fee wasn't worth it might go ahead and decide to turn them in. So we could see these populations increase, but what won't change, I guarantee you, we won't see the gem rate fundamentally change. So even if, you know, another 10,000 of these are sent in to get graded, I would assume there's only going to be another 3,000-ish that come back in the PSA 10, which gives me a lot of, you know, comfort. It gives me some comfort in that if I buy one in a PSA 10, no matter how many are sent through, the population's not going to be flooded overnight. So the next group that I wanted to talk about right here are the Pikachus. Now, you know how much I love that Pikachu V. In my mind, that is one of the most underrated cards in the entire Sword and Shield era, and I might be a little bit biased on this one, but I think the art is awesome. I think that that card is just absolute fire. Again, another card that isn't insanely hard to pull. I know I've pulled a couple of them myself, but when you look at it, this card has been supported at the $30 price point multiple times in the past, and it's coming in at $20 right now. Then you got the Pikachu VMAX right there, another trainer gallery card. That card's been supported already up into the $40 range. So again, another card that could eventually get back up to and surpass its one-year highs if Lost Origin does what we think it's going to do. Lost Origin sells out a couple years down the road, packs are harder to find. I think these singles cards will see a little bit of appreciation in value. Now, the gem rate on these is more similar to what we saw in the first ones, right? The three cards that we just talked about, that Charizard, that Pikachu, that Gengar, they are anomalies in the Lost Origin set. They have ridiculously hard gem rates. These are closer to the 50% plus a little bit, which we've seen in the past again, but there's a decent number of them in PSA 10s already. So I do like these two for the long run. Again, are these going to put your kids through college because they're going to be worth $10,000 someday? Absolutely not. But do I think at their current price points, they're very approachable? Do I think that you can get some solid gains in the future? Abso-freaking-lutely. Now, the next ones that we're going to talk about right here aren't on the top 15 currently, but I like them. So we saw a lot of rainbow cards in Unbroken Bonds, right, in Unified Minds. And this Aerodactyl card, for whatever reason, I just personally like the art. Probably not for everybody. I know not everybody's into the rainbow space, but I love the fact that it's tied to the #2 chase card in the whole set. I just love the artwork in general. It's only $8 right now, so does it have some opportunity to maybe find its way back into the top 15? Does it have a way to make it into the top 10? Probably. The other thing that I called out, right, was we didn't see any trainers in the top 15. We didn't see any supporters up there. We saw item cards, we saw stadiums, but we didn't see any supporters, which is really off-brand. It's really off-trend. So this Nessa card, I have been a huge fan of this Nessa card, even back when it was a $10 card. I just kept saying to myself, Lost Origin is going to have a supporter card in the top 15, in the top 10. Almost every set does, so why would this not fit the bill? But now that this card's even cheaper, again, it's another one that I really, really like. It's just so rare for us not to see a supporter in the top 15. This is awesome artwork. I think this one is eventually going to make it. Now, when you look at the PSA 10s and when you look at the overall population, right, like that full art Aerodactyl rainbow right there, there just haven't been a lot of them sent through. Another great example of a card that if it starts to pick up, I do expect the PSA population to increase, and guess what? The gem rate isn't that low, so we could see a bunch of them come into PSA 10 holders. Same thing with the Nessa right there. So we'll have to see where they flush out in the end, but I do think that these two cards from a raw card perspective have an opportunity to get up into that top 15, top 5, maybe even top 10. We'll have to see. Now, the next cards right here, I always end most of these videos with a little bit of a flyer, and these two cards, in my mind, are a bit of a flyer. They have really, really high gem rates, so they're not hard to get in PSA 10s. They're obviously big names. You got Mew, you got Pikachu right now. I think one's going for $6, the other one's going for $5.75 right now, so not a lot of money. But this design, this artwork, we don't see it anymore. It doesn't mean that Pokemon can't bring it back, but this black and gold artwork I think is really unique. I think it's really cool. I'm a big fan of these. These are two other cards that you can get in a PSA 10 holder at a very approachable price point right now. And at the end of the day, they're two of the biggest names in the entire Pokemon space, coming from one of the biggest sets, from one of the biggest eras. It is very hard to go wrong with these in that $40, $50 range from a PSA 10 perspective. Are they going to moonshot and allow you to go ahead and pay off the mortgage on your house when it's time to graduate? Absolutely not. But do they have the opportunity to make some noise in the Lost Origin space and find their way up into the top 20, top 15, top 10? They absolutely could. I think top 10 is a bit of a stretch, but I do think that these could make it into the top 15. And again, we don't know. We're going to have to wait and see what happens with a lot of these Sword and Shield sets, specifically Lost Origin and Brilliant Stars, once they start to sell out on the Pokemon Center. I do think they have a bright future, and it's going to be a ton of fun for us to look at. I hope you all enjoyed this video. I hope you enjoyed the walk through Lost Origin and some of these singles cards that might be flying a bit under the radar. And if you did and you made it to the end, hit that subscribe button. If you have questions or comments, drop them down below. And as always, if you like what you saw, give us a big old thumbs up. I appreciate you more than I can say. I hope you have an epic one. I'll talk to you later. See you, everybody. Bye.